Yeah, if you want to perform, it's an open forum.
There we go. Okay, are we ready in the booth? Are we ready to go? All right, well, good evening. Thank you for spending some time here with us at JCAL, and to all of you out in YouTube land, hello to you too. Good evening to you as well. This evening is a portion of our initiative called Building Equity for BIPOC Artists here at the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning, and that is a program sponsored by the New York Trust. What it does, it brings artists of color to the stage here in various forms, various disciplines, various musical talents. And this evening we have Liminal figures. On stage with me is León, Isaac Matus, Eva Redamonti, and Emelie Weibel. I hope I said all of those right. So for any other information regarding the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning, please go on our website at jcal.org. Thank you and enjoy the show.
love it. I love it. Overtones. One more round.
Hi again. So I just said outside the mic that that was really soothing, and I had a headache when I first came in. No, my headache is gone, and I feel so relaxed. It's like that was so therapeutic. So thank you. So Marcello has a question or two that he is going to address to the musicians. Marcello?
Check, check, check.
I think one mic is fine. So, good evening.
Hey.
Hello, everybody. People here and home, watching on YouTube, or watching live, or watching later after tonight. I want to, first of all, thank you all for being here, virtually or in person. My name is Marcello Di Russo, and I'm curating tonight's event. I want to thank all of you guys, and I want to really spend like some minutes to ask you some questions of what we just heard and see. So I will go straight to Sol, León. Can you please tell us what we just what was what we just see was what was about, and what was up there, and why you guys were watching what was going on the screen, and how what we heard related to what we just seen there.
Sure. No, that's good. I love the silhouettes now. Just keeps adding. Well, thank you, Marcello, and thanks for having us. I think we're good. I think you're good. Yeah, it's all good. Well, so this is kind of like this piece cruising. Like I use a lot of kind of like alternative ways of like writing things to convey ways of performing music, either by myself or with others in this case. And you know, there's a lot of it's mainly improvised music. The pieces have a lot of there's a couple steps to it. There's like the communication with the performers, conveying, you know, what it's about, how to navigate that drawing or that graphic, and there's a lot of also like emotional background to it that I ask the performers to like, you know, engage with, and then from that it's really just interpreting with our sonic language, with our musical language, what we see in there. In this case, in this specific piece, I was aiming to kind of like situate the performers and myself like in a place where we like interact with objects in a space, those objects can be in, again, interpreted by everyone as forms of like metaphorically a person or a specific object. We use this word playground. That's how we call it. So like we say like imagine you're in a playground, right? Where there's like the bridge and there's the stairs that you can go up and there's like the swing and there's like the slide. And so how you as a kid, right, you just like go out to the playground and you don't necessarily have like a direction every time you go there of how you're going to do that. You just go and in the moment you just interact with the space and interact with how you navigate that space and the objects that are around that space. So that's like the basic idea, is like interacting with the objects around the space. I ask the performers to situate themselves into, imagine that what they're seeing there is like a three-dimensional space, right? A space that exists like in a three-dimensional world. I ask them, each one of them, to choose a starting point, to situate themselves in a starting point, and from there to like navigate through the space and to interact with the objects in the space. And that navigation could be in a form of, physically, this is all abstraction, right? Like touching the object or being on top of the object or crossing the object or observing the object, and then making the relations, those relationships, and translating those into like sonic gestures, musical gestures. And then, I tend to like, my pieces are normally, they're not linear in a way that like they're starting a point and finishing a point. There's always that ambiguity of everyone starts in a different place and there's not time constraint. A piece can last for 15 minutes or can last for 3 hours. It all really depends on the space we're performing and also like how much does it take us to like navigate through the space. So for example, I don't know if you observe, but like some of the performers finished performing before. Some of us kept performing because we all navigate through the space at our own times. So some of them finished navigating the whole space and decided like, I'm tired of playing in the playground, I'm gonna go home. But some of us were like having a blast in the playground and we wanted to like keep exploring all the objects on it. So yeah, it's pretty much that's like the simple way of putting it. But there's like more complexity to it when like you make it more personal. And in my case, it relates a lot with like navigating my own space. That's why I call like liminal figures and the work that captures a lot of these scores that like navigate that like liminality of being a non-binary person or the liminality of like being an immigrant, being in a space where like you can, we're all here in New York and we feel like New Yorkers in a way, but we're also not. So we're not like one way on one side or in another, but we're always kind of like in between, navigated those spaces. And so how we navigate those spaces, how we walk through those spaces, how we interact with those spaces. So it gets more deeper than just like objects, but like also like personal, things that we navigate through in our lives. Trauma, pain, our relationships with the others, our relationships with the place we live. Yeah, it's pretty much that.
Great. So now I'm curious to ask Isaac and Eva and Emelie here. What was your contribution to tonight's playground, like Saul was saying, and what you were doing on your station and how you interpreted that visual and the improvisation with your fellow artist?
Yeah, so like Saul mentioned, I think, and partly for me as well, like there was two like components of interpreting and playing the piece. Like one is the physical, one being in the objects. For me, like as the instruction, if you will, says, placing yourself in the three-dimensional space and navigating through the objects. And then, like, from a more emotional or metaphorical stance, it was more like playing with the notion of being lost and being free at the same time, because like there's so many different objects, so many shapes, so many multiple places where you can go, and once you finish one, where do you go? Do you repeat it? Do you go to a different one that's close or far away? And so like all of those things for me were not, obviously, like I mentioned, the component of being in the space, but also like philosophically and like emotionally, like how do I connect that with my day-to-day life, and like Saul mentioned, the experience of being from a different place but living here, that it's a place that like quote unquote welcomes like people from a lot of different places, but also it's rough and so like a lot of dualities to navigate around. And also, so for me, we had already played this piece a couple times, and for the first time I felt like it was harder this time in a way, because you get to explore it a little more deeply, so the first time maybe it was like, maybe the emotional component wasn't that, like I didn't get to explore it as much because I was more focused on like, okay, the circle and the arrow and the thing, and but this time, like, or as you do it a little more, and even before the performance, like you already understand a little bit, so it makes you dig deeper into like, again, the physicality of moving, and also what it represents, and what are you expressing when performing, like in terms of emotion and thought, basically.
Eva? Maybe this is it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, so for me, I felt I was trying to treat this piece like I was a child, kind of walking through and stumbling around the space. But I found it difficult as well, like you said, because I'm a visual artist primarily right now, and so I'm so used to thinking about distances of space in terms of measurement, and like how long is it and how long is this one, like, and that's hard to, like, back when I studied music composition before, and I was thinking about it was so hard for me to think about like space in terms of like planning out the sections of my pieces, because it was just hard to imagine how long is that, you know what I mean? And so I think this piece was challenging for me in terms of that, but more so I just had to remind myself just to like keep playing, and just literally play like a child, and I think I tend to take things too literally, and I'm really black and white in the way I think about things, so allowing myself to do that and just try to associate like textures and patterns with lines, I think it's very therapeutic. So it was a nice form of therapy, this piece. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also I found interesting, for me it was a lot about improvising, of course, and having these different shapes and textures trigger specific things that I could then respond to with my voice. But I was also very influenced by all of you. And so it created that space where you can follow your own emotional path in a way, but also be helped, supported by the people around you. And yeah.
I love that.
It's interesting because you guys actually already talked a little bit about spaces, be in a certain space, metaphorically or like actually living in a space. And we mentioned already that actually on the stage we are representing 5 different countries, right? So Isaac, you're from Colombia, right? Sol from Ecuador. Eva is American artist, and Emelie is from Switzerland, and I'm Italian. So actually, so like really, we are all over the place. So I want to ask you, each of you, what's the relationship between your home country, your home, culture, and now living. Now we all live in New York City. Many of us in Queens. It's a really, unique place for sure. So what's your relationship artistically and personally with the city and how everything is developing in this city for people that are either from another country or if I'm not wrong another state, right? So we can go around.
Yeah. So for me, that's philosophically speaking, that's something that I question a lot sometimes, as far as how much being from a place dictates my behavior, my upbringing, the way that I live my life, and in terms of art making, I've from several years ago to this point, I started to become more and more influenced by the sounds of Colombia and Latin America. And at first it was very much I learned a lot of some of the instruments and the music, and then little by little I started to become more interested in other things musically speaking, but I didn't feel like what I got to absorb from that period of time left, so there's things that are there, but they may not be necessarily explicitly, oh yeah, that's a Colombian or Latin American element right there. But when I'm making it, the way that it speaks to me it comes from that. And in the city, I think I've had the opportunity to experience that from many different angles. From there's a lot of movements here that are very connected to the traditional music from there, and they do really good stuff, and they bring people that from the territories, and so there's that very authentic and and for the lack of a better word, pure expression of what that tradition sounds like. But there's also other stuff like this where it's more abstract, and so I think that's something that I value a lot about living in this place, is that you get to pick, do you want to experience in this context of music and identity from a particular place? Do you want to experience how it is unprocessed or do you want to just see the other alternatives? And yeah, there's a little bit of everything, I think.
Yeah, I relate a lot with that. I keep speaking in my work about this concept of liminality, right? As this space that is pretty kind of in between things, or either not being in one side or not being in the other, having both of them, but also rejecting them at the same time. And nothing like New York to just experience that, right? And I relate a little bit with Isaac in the sense of for me, that's why I keep working and thinking about this notion of the liminal, right? Because I grew up in my country and I felt of course I was influenced and I was surrounded by a lot of Latin American rhythms and culture and music. We probably were dancing even before we were able to walk. So it's so natural for us to dance, right? And things like, and even if I don't listen necessarily every day to like salsa or merengue or cumbia, is so embedded in my brain and in my body. It's like we were here today, just like sound checking and doing all our like weird sounds, quote unquote, and we were sitting and we started like Isaac is always like singing some weird song that we will remember from like when you like take a bus ride in Ecuador and in Colombia, and I was like, oh my god, now it's stuck in my head. Like I haven't heard that in ages. Or I come with something and was like, oh, you remember? I was like, it's so crazy. So it's pretty like embedded into us, but for me, like I didn't necessarily felt represented by it, and it's always been this kind of like interesting search of like what does represent me, and the answer is always like that, precisely that liminality, that attraction of all of it and rejection of all of it. It's like putting every single thing in a bowl, like mixing it, drinking it, and then like vomiting it out. That's as gross as that sounds, but it's a little bit of that. So yeah, so New York, jazz, free jazz, experimental music, you know, conceptual work, conceptual art, salsa, merengue, cumbia, dance music, house, techno, like the amount of things that like are part of me, that interest me, and that are like very important to me, is like it's so plural, and the city is so plural that it just makes sense for me, like how it specifically Brooklyn and Queens. It's like I feel like when I go to Manhattan, I'm a little lost, and then I get back to Brooklyn or Queens, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I know where I am right now. It's like, yes, I love that. I heard that reggaeton there, that cumbia there, that house there, that disco there, and like, it's just like cool. This is my place where like everything collides. So yeah, it feels like, for as I said, like I cannot just like pretend that like I'm gonna make this type of music or this type of music or this type of music, because like it doesn't really fully represent me. So the only thing I can do is, again, put everything on a blender and just see what it comes out of it. And sometimes this comes out of it, right? And that's how I experience New York too. It's like being in a blender. You're always being shaken.
That's awesome. um, that's awesome. I'm coming from a completely different place in terms of, in terms of how I relate to the city, but I appreciate the same things that you're talking about. Like, I think that I came from somewhere super isolated. I didn't know how to relate to people. I was in a comfort zone because I was sort of in a zone of constantly making work, constantly being by myself, just being exposed to the same sort of radius for many days. I'm from Connecticut, so it's very isolated there. And I think that when I came to New York, I'm kind of learning how to relate my work to other people and seeing how being uncomfortable and how being exposed to all these different things affect me and affect my work. And I feel like I'm growing another 3 feet. So maybe, I feel like my childhood was one phase of my work, just like the technicality of it and growing my body of work. And then coming to the city, I feel like is an emotional growth for me. So I'm learning how to relate to people who are different than me and being exposed to different cultures and different lifestyles and seeing how that affects me in my work. So, but I love this city.
Yeah, me too. Huh?
We hate it too sometimes.
Yeah, of course.
Part of it. Very romantic.
Yeah, it's the extremes. No, what I like is the type of chaos, especially in terms of sounds. And as you were saying, everyone is listening to music and is kind of sharing it with everybody else, whether it's in a car or in your apartment or.
So a speaker outside. And
Yeah, and sound system culture. So it's all of that I really appreciate here, that I didn't grow up with in Switzerland, because that's probably the most quiet place in the world. Even the trains are extremely quiet, and everything is extremely organized. And there were great festivals when I grew up, and where I was exposed to really amazing music in Switzerland, and pretty niche music too, like in big festivals, like in electronic music or hip hop or free jazz, but everything is very set up and organized, and it's rarely people living and playing in the street like I can experience in other places. And that's, I don't know what else to, yeah.
I'm just curious because I mean, I'm very privileged that I can work with all these people, because they're not just like great artists, but they're like people that I care and love a lot. They're my friends, and that makes it more powerful. And from knowing Emelie, we actually studied together, and like I actually studied together with almost all of you. Well, you graduated before, but with Emelie, it's like I know your work, and you were talking about how like you grew up in this very quiet place, that is everything very structured, but also you've been here in New York for so long, and I think like your work really, it's like those two words colliding, because Emelie's work is very, it's like the sensitivity of it's kind of like is impressive. It's like everything is so subtle and so intentional, and there's so much softness, but at the same time there's chaos and there's character and there's like eeriness. And so like it's those two words colliding. It's and yeah, like when you were talking about your experience, I was just like relating all of it with like the music you do, and it's really, traveling, meeting, connecting really does that to us as artists, right? Let us, as I said before, just put things on a blender and find our own way, our own shake, our own smoothie.
Yeah, and I think we all see the diversity in the sound that you create, wherever, like from an electronic device or an acoustic device, and the dynamics you use, how loud you can go, how soft, how smooth, how sweet, how harsh. So there was a blend of everything. So, space, blend, like it was all, up there tonight. So I want to thank you all for this. Any closing statement, Saul?
Well, want to thank the Jamaican Center for the Arts and Learning for, having us and allowing us to like perform in this lovely stage. Thank you so much. It's crazy that, thank you so much. Thank you, Marcello, for making the connection. As you said, like we're all from Queens, yet we're so apart from each other. We're from Ridgewood, I'm from Ridgewood. And, that's New York. Like similar experience, very different experiences. So like, coming all the way from Ridgewood, Queens to Jamaica, Queens. And like look at the space, going around for a walk, kind of like definitely that influenced the performance too, right? Like just us walking around, trying to like go get some water and just like experiencing the space too, and then bringing that to the stage. And so really nice to be able to do that. I feel like as artists, like being able to move and like experience different stages, different people, different spaces contributes a lot to our experience. So again, thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Marcelo, for like bringing us here. And
Again, thank you all.
thanks to like these beautiful people I can perform with.
Absolutely.
Thanks for like joining in this craziness.
Thank you, and have a good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.